We usually like to start off by going back a little bit and understanding where you come from, as in where were you born? Are you Swiss? Are you from around here?
Yeah, I was born and raised near Zurich in a town called Rapperswil.
Yeah.
Went to school in Switzerland, didn't travel much until I was 16. Started my first company kind of by accident before that, when I was 14, with a friend that was a bit older. And since then, I've always been passionate about technology ventures. Early stage startups, first 24 months is usually what I'm most excited about, when it's all about finding the initial team, initial product. Studied at ETH Zurich, and then in Hong Kong, a mix between electrical engineering and computer science. And then since then had a pretty interesting ride that led me around the world a few times. Lived in Berlin, London, Hong Kong, New York, and a few more places. And then at some point I started to partake and build different companies at the same time. And that's when I, about 4 years ago, decided to give up on having a home and packed all my stuff into a bag and was on the go pretty much nonstop.
Yeah.
Until earlier this year, when I started to focus on one project that's based here in Switzerland. And now I travel a bit less, and now I have a place again near here in Pfäffikon.
Okay. Before we get into that, I wanted to understand a little bit more about where your entrepreneurial bug came from. When you were a kid, were you already in school trying to sell candy to your friends and to your classmates, or comic books, or?
I remember going door to door and selling stones. And then what was even worse, I had other neighbors' kids sell stones for me and I would take a commission. But that's not really the sales aspect. Was something that always was very tough for me, or something that I only came to appreciate in the last few years, actually, that sales is in by itself a very valuable skill. What fascinated me about...
So you outsourced it?
Very often we outsource it, or a lot of the companies that I am involved with were not sales heavy in the traditional sense. They were SaaS businesses, software that you buy online. So we use scalable marketing channels instead of the in-person sales. But I think what I really liked, and what led me to capture or be completely absorbed by ventures, is that even as a young kid, I always really enjoyed tough problems, challenges. Still nowadays, one of my favorite pastimes is escape rooms. Has anyone played escape rooms? Okay, good crowd. And once we started that first business kind of by accident. It was a friend and me, and we started doing websites and logos for friends and family. And this was at the beginning of 2000, when everyone needed a website but didn't really know why. We kind of just stumbled upon that opportunity and started doing stuff together without really realizing we're starting a business. And what captured my attention and fascination was that suddenly I had this like breadth and full world of complex problems that needed solving. And it was not just technical, it was cultural, interpersonal, and of course also technology. So
when you were selling stones, did you think as a kid that one day you'd be that you'd go into business, that you'd be a business owner?
I always wanted to become an inventor. I don't know the English word, Daniel Düsentrieb. What's the English? Does anyone know? But like the comic, the cartoon figure.
Mad scientist.
Mad scientist.
Okay.
So I was fascinated by what he did, right? He took like screws and batteries, and then he created like floating vehicles and everything. And as a very young kid, I was fascinated by that. And for a very long time, I'd say even late into my teens, like I never wanted to become an entrepreneur. I wanted to become an inventor and create stuff. And that's also what drove my interest in technology and building stuff. So I think more an inventor than an entrepreneur, but then when you think about it, I think the two are very similar, right, in the skill set that you need and the curiosity you need for the world.
Do you feel like you were influenced by your parents or by your relatives? Was there anyone in your family that was kind of crazy like that?
I think if anything, them saying I shouldn't do this made it more interesting. No, but my parents are both not entrepreneurs. Yeah. They're typical middle-class employees. And when we started that first company, MediaSign, I was 14 when we started working under that name, and then a couple of years later we started the actual company, the limited liability entity. Yeah. In order to buy my half of the company, I took out a loan from a friend's dad. And so one day I came home to my parents and I said I took out a 25 grand loan, which of course was not what they expected me to do at that age. But I've always, from a very early age, I've had my own ideas. I always felt a bit different. I also never got along great with kids my age. I was always doing much better with kids that were 4, 5, 6 years older. And so I think to some degree, my parents just let me do whatever I wanted to do. And of course, then over time, when stuff started to work out and we were able to grow the company, they also started to appreciate my entrepreneurial spirit.
Was he older than you or about the same age?
My co-founder was, and still one of my best friends, 4 years older than I am. Yeah, so he was 18 at the time. He had completed his apprenticeship. And so, and he was taking care of clients because I'm not sure as a 14-year-old I could have sold much.
And how did you guys stumble across or come up with the idea?
Boy Scouts.
Sorry?
Boy Scouts.
Boy Scouts.
Yeah, we were in the Boy Scouts together. And originally, it all started with him asking me if we could just get together on the weekend and code up a website for the local Boy Scouts chapter that we were part of. And we did that for like a weekend or two. I was doing the coding, he was doing the design. And then we just had so much fun working together. We said, okay, let's find another project and then another project. And at some point, people wanted to start paying us. And then there was a second influence, which was at the time, he was working as a radio host. And he worked with one of the Miss Switzerland contestants at the time. And so we decided to support her by creating a website for her and stuff. And I know it's very hard to imagine that 2 teenagers at that age would want to work for Miss Switzerland contestants. But it was something that was attractive to us. And that's how a lot of the initial traction happened.
Okay. Do you see, I mean, often with startups and entrepreneurship, it's about timing and luck, or luck and timing. Mm-hmm. Do you see that as being the case as well? I mean, to be able to work with Miss Switzerland and then break into that network, I'm sure if it hadn't been for that client, things might have been different. How do you see that in the general, I mean, because you've been the last years working with so many startups, investing, advising, how do you see the concept of timing and luck and the right place, the right time?
I think it's a huge component, yeah. I think you need to have a good team, you need to have the skills necessary, but also good culture and good chemistry between the founders. But then, of course, especially in the first 12 months, I would say 80-20 principle is probably a lot of luck and timing.
Right. So from coding websites for Miss Switzerland to last year raising 200 million francs or dollars for a startup.
Not as fun.
That's a bit of a leap.
Yeah.
How did that come about? How did that transition happen from
I mean, I've spent my last 17 years in startups, right? I did my studies and I had a very brief course to working at an investment bank, but everything in between was different startup ideas, and most of them failed or didn't go as far as we wanted them to go. But I think over time, you build a network, you build experience, you start to see things differently. I built markers for what I think can indicate or can be early indicators of success. And then I think it all also leads back to luck. I mean, DFINITY, we started in, Dominic, our founder, started thinking about it in 2015. I joined the team in 2016. That was right ahead of the curve when all the excitement happened in the blockchain space. And then the biggest part of our investment we raised slightly after the big, after the excitement turned back. But I think it's a lot about timing, right? 2 years earlier, we probably wouldn't have survived. 2 years later, it would not be an interesting idea anymore. So I think it comes down to what you mentioned, timing, luck, and I think team.
So tell us about DFINITY.
Yeah, so I think in a few words, DFINITY's vision is to build an internet that profits and benefits from the underlying properties of blockchain, which are trustless, unstoppability, transparency, and a few more properties that we can inherit. And we have existing platforms out there like Ethereum or Bitcoin, and they offer some capabilities. But right now what we see is that all these existing platforms, they don't offer the bandwidth that we need for more serious, scalable, mass adoption applications. And so in a very simple analogy, you could say Ethereum is ISDN, and now DFINITY is broadband for the decentralized internet.
Were you directly involved in the fundraising aspect?
I was involved, but not in the lead or not leading the negotiations.
Okay. So in between, so jumping a little bit back in between DFINITY and the last few years of you running your own startups and then becoming an investor, how did that transition from running your own company to wanting to invest in startups?
So first time I invested in startups was in 2014, okay. Roughly 5.5 years ago. And back then, what I realized is that what I really want to focus on and specialize in and be really good at is the first 24 months of a startup. So I'm probably not the right guy if you want to have a CEO or founder that builds out the company to thousands of employees. I'm really interested in companies where the team is still small, the product is still kind of rough, and it's all about like shaping that initial product, getting it out there. And then I asked myself, what's a good way for me to scale my exposure to those experiences, to capture more and more? And investment, being an angel investor, early stage in pre-seed, seed, maybe Series A startups, to me sounded like a very good way to participate in multiple companies at the same time and provide value as well, but at the same time learn in parallel. And that's when we set up Tenderloin Ventures with the same co-founder that I started MediaSign with. And we decided to invest in 10 ventures, build a first batch. We had 2 buckets with e-commerce, because we felt that Amazon would have a high barrier of entry into Switzerland, and that's why we will still have high margin niche markets. And at the same time, very scalable. The second bucket was very scalable businesses. So what you would call now B2B SaaS, or just very scalable business, because most of the processes are driven by software, not by human beings.
What's the biggest surprise you had in becoming an investor?
I think on the negative end of the spectrum, it's definitely when I realized for the first time that we're not just friends with founders, that they also lied to me, right? Some of the ventures didn't go well, and there's definitely things that were miscommunicated at least. On the positive side, I think it just reinforces my belief that team is everything at that stage, right? You need a vision and you need a general direction which you want to go so you can build your team. But at that early stage, it's really just the company that you're building it with, the people surrounding the founder. And maybe that's not so much a surprise, but a reinforcement of that belief. I think I might have underestimated that 5 years ago. Now it's the number one thing that I invest in.
The team.
Yeah. The initial founding team.
Right. So, essentialism. How does essentialism and investment coincide? They don't sound like complementary, but how do you combine them?
Yeah. So for me, one was a mean to be better at the other. So what I realized once I started investing, and I realized that not all interesting companies will probably emerge in Switzerland, I wanted to become more free and liberated from one geographical location. And that's when I started traveling a lot more, when I started investing in other countries, in the US, in Germany. And then, because I'm very black and white, and I realized that this is so important to me that a lot of other things are not important to me, and it was easy for me to give up on a lot of the stuff that I previously owned, and I packed just this backpack. So in that sense, one led to the other, but then I've also learned so much from this experiment that I think I'm now incorporating that, or I've only recently started being very, very focused and consequent with what what I allowed to exist inside my head. Right? There was a time when I was being an investor in about 10 or 11 companies, and at the same time I was a founder in 2 or 3 companies, which is way too much. It's super interesting, very stimulating intellectually, but way too much. So, and then at some point I made the decision to downsize everything that's in my head so I can be fully focused on one thing. So in that sense, I've learned from the experiment that was first just served the purpose of being more connected to the companies I was with.
Right.
And then I think it also made me a better investor over time.
Was there something that triggered that? Was there something that made you focus on the minimalistic lifestyle?
So when we talk about things, yes, I mean the fact that I was just spending so much time abroad and didn't really need a place here anymore. When we talk about minimalism and essentialism applied to my head, I think it's just been a transition. I always knew that at some point, I mean, focus is good and it's also satisfying, but it was just a process of like finding out what is it that really resonates with me, what is it that I want to focus on.
There was, I think, 1 or 2 years that you didn't actually have I guess you had a PO box, but you know,
well, actually,
not your own place.
Yeah, but I've always paid taxes in Switzerland. I've always had an address here. I've always been able to receive mail here, but I was just sub-renting a room that at a friend's place, basically.
To receive mail.
Yeah.
And how did that feel to not actually have somewhere to call home?
So it's interesting. I think there's a shift that happened in what I perceive to be my home. Right? Traditionally, I think when we think of what is a home or where's my home, we think of the place, the address where we live, the bed that we sleep in, the same door that we enter every evening and leave every morning. And once I didn't have that anymore, I asked myself, what is it that really makes me feel at home? And what I realized is it's just spending time with people that I value. So I feel at home spending time with friends here in Zurich or in the US. Like it's the same feeling for me.
Right.
It's not connected to any given geographical place anymore.
You told me earlier that you've actually downsized. So you're known for having 64 items, but now you're down to 50.
Yeah, I think it's like 48 or 50 in the last iteration, yeah.
Does everyone see his bag?
Full of cash?
Yeah.
I mean,
it's the investor bag. So stand up for a second and show everyone.
Here you go.
That's your life.
No, that's not my life. That's just the things in my life. Luckily, it's... How do I go hiking? I have a second pair of shoes besides these leather sneakers, which are Vibrams. They're also a great accessory or type of shoes to have if you want to make dating harder. I met my wife, the first date with Elena, my wife. I was wearing these Vibrams and still convinced her. So that was no, but yeah. In short, that's how I go hiking. I just wear these like toe shoes. And then earlier this year, I was in Nepal hiking for 2 weeks in snow. That's when I just borrow shoes from someone. Similar with lederhosen. I was just like at Oktoberfest last weekend, and I was told you need to have lederhosen when you go there, so I borrowed some.
If during the course of the conversation someone has a question, just raise your hand and you can also take questions. We'll bring the microphone over to you. Now that you're married, does that mean that the amount of your possessions have increased?
No, because now I have someone that I can give them to and they don't appear on my list. No, I think there's both sides, right? For one, because we both spend a lot more time in Switzerland right now, it made sense to get a place. And of course, right now I do own a number of forks and a number of plates and a bed and a table. But I think what hasn't changed is our view on the importance of things. So I don't think I'll ever start accumulating t-shirts and pants and all that stuff again. I'll always be conscious, because what I've realized is that it just makes me so happy to be liberated from stuff, to never have to think about what is where, right? I always have everything with me. So if for some reason I need to catch the flight to Tokyo tonight, I'm ready to go. And that's something that gives me peace. I never need to pack, I never need to prepare, I never need to think about what is it that I'm going to wear today. But then I think the number is just a number, whether it's 48 or 64 or 600. I think what's important is that we focus on the stuff that gives us energy and doesn't drain energy from us.
Right.
And that's why I like the term essentialism more than minimalism. Because minimalism for me means less is better. The fewer things you own, the better you are, which I don't subscribe to. I think it's all about being conscious about what you want to keep in your life and what you want to exclude from your life.
And not so much the actual number of items. Yeah. Yeah. Going back a little bit to the topic of investing, is there any areas that you're focused on? And what's your focus right now, or your latest development when it comes to investing?
So I've just set up a new vehicle where we're going to invest into, the primary focus will be B2B SaaS startups, right. So business to business, software as a service startups.
Anyone here doing SaaS?
Yeah, quite a few people, and I think a few more that I talked to before. Yeah, I think it's a big area, and I think it's also something that you can scale fairly well in a country like Switzerland where labor cost is so high. Right? You want to automate things. You want to automate your sales process, and you want to sell through performance channels. And I think in terms of areas, on a high level, I would say fintech, insurtech, and proptech. Although that might change over time. And I mean, I'm still learning every day about all these areas and discovering new interesting concepts. And then, as I said, I think the most important value of a company at the stage where I invest is the team. So that's not to say I couldn't invest in a B2C company where I just totally believe in the founding team.
Okay. So you're currently looking for pipeline?
I'm building up deal flow. If anyone has interesting startups, send them my way. Always happy to just also... One thing that we're starting is, we'll call it jam sessions. The first one is actually happening at the end of October together with the Entrepreneur Club of ETH, right. Which will just be like office hours. So we'll create a space where people can come by that are interested in starting their own company, and we'll just jam business ideas. We'll just be there and we'll talk about ideas and problems, and we'll share experiences. Because I think that's what the ecosystem really needs. It's not so much about whether I invest or someone else. I think it's about empowering the next generation and everyone coming out of, all these smart people coming out of our universities, and having access to people that are willing to share those experiences. Because back when I started my first company, I didn't know anything. And there's so much that I could have avoided if I had some sort of mentor or someone that would have been willing to share all their experiences with me. Luckily now, I think the ecosystem has developed a whole lot in the last 10, 15 years. But that's one way how we want to contribute to the ecosystem, to create a place where we won't even talk about investment or us investing versus anyone else. We'll just share experiences.
Okay. I've seen that you tend to put a lot of emphasis as well on the physical well-being and your diets, and how that connects to the mental well-being. You recently had a extensive water-only fast. How many days was that?
The longest one I think was 15 days without food. Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about that experience and why?
Yeah. Let's start with the why. I think it starts like many things in my life where I just got some. It's very hard for me to say no once I get challenged by someone. I seem to just respond incredibly well to someone challenging me to do something. And this actually started like a friend of mine, an entrepreneur in Germany. We were on the phone and he told me that he hadn't eaten for 4 days. And I was like, if this guy can do it, I can do it as well. And so pretty much without much preparation, I jumped into the experiment, and that one lasted for I think 14 or 15 days. I've since done it 3 or 4 times. And what's interesting about water fasting for me is that it gives me this incredible clarity after a few days of not eating. The first couple of days, first 48 hours for me are typically kind of hard. I get a headache and I have a bit less energy. But then after that, I actually go on a streak of like very high energy levels and very little sleep needed. So that's one thing that I enjoy. And now I'm always experimenting, right? This originally was just an experiment, like can I live without a home? And in the same way, I approach many different things in my life, and fasting is another fun area to experiment with. I think fasting is good, at least the way I try to evaluate these experiments and see if they're good for me or not is just to be very conscious about how I'm feeling and how it impacts my sensory system. One thing that I did that I probably won't repeat anytime soon is in one of those fasts, I also stopped drinking for 48 hours at a time and then only drink once and then stop for another 48 hours. And what was interesting about that for me was that it's interesting how quickly the survival instincts kick in my body. Because I do this while I still work out, I still work normally, I still go run. And then after about 24 hours of not having any liquids, it was interesting how my body just was craving water. Like I could be working here, and if someone turned on the faucet in the kitchen, like my brain would just yell, go and have some water. And I think it's interesting to experiment with that, but I would not recommend it in any way, just to be safe. But it's fun. No, I think it's just one example of how I like to push the limit every now and then, but also be conscious of like how do I feel, and if it gets too bad, then of course there's no one stopping me from stopping the experiment.
Yeah. And in general, so you do that, every now and then, whenever you feel, it's the right time to do that. But what do you do on a regular basis to maintain, that consciousness and that high efficiency?
So, well, let me start with efficiency. I think I gain a lot of efficiency from not questioning myself and my processes. So what I've done, also because a while back, at some point I asked myself, how can I fire myself? Now that I was part of different projects, how can I exit them without hurting the company? And one thing that I did is I wrote a Cedric operating manual, or a Cedric operating system, which is a document about 30 pages that describes how I do stuff. Everything from high-level stuff of how do I generally approach problems, people problems, how do I think about life, all the way down to where do I want to sit on an airplane on a day flight versus a night flight. And
Which is?
Well, during the day I want to sit in an aisle or window depending on how long it is, and at night I always want to sit in a window seat and just sleep. And creating that document has helped delegating a lot of tasks while not losing quality, right? Because it's so detailed. Yeah. So I think that's one of the efficiency hacks. I can have someone else manage my calendar, and it's managed the same way I would manage it. I can have someone else book my travel, and it's the same quality as if I would book it. Now the second part, more interesting, conscious. How do I retain consciousness? There was a time when I was setting annual goals, and I'm sure, who else has set annual goals and failed? A lot of people usually, right? But there's something magical about 1st of January. You have this energy, you're like, oh, I leave all the old stuff behind in the old year, and now I have a full load of energy ready to attack this new year. And what happened to me is I tried to do many things at once. January was usually fine, February I was kind of slacking, and then March I was usually unhappy and frustrated, because I realized that I will not get stuff done properly. And then I thought about how can I hack this and how can I turn it into something positive. And I realized that my year should only have 90 days. 90 days for me is a time that's long enough so that I can have an impact. You can get healthier, you can learn a new language to some degree, you can start a new business within 90 days. But it's not so long that I have no emotional understanding of where I'm going to be 90 days from now. Whereas 365 days, I have no idea where I'm going to be a year from now, right. But I have a pretty good idea of where I'm going to be in 90 days from now by the end of the year. And then I started cutting my year into quarters, and at the end of each quarter, I take some time off. Typically, I try to align it with a flight of like 4 to 6 hours, and I write about my life. I write about 12 areas in my life and about the last 90 days. First question is always, how did I feel? And these areas could be money, friends, business, health, fitness, and a few more. I'm not going to be able to list them all, but for example, friends is an important one, right? Because being away so often and traveling so often, life goes by kind of fast, and I wanted to be conscious of the fact that I don't want to miss out on important life events of some of my friends. Mm-hmm. So at the end of these 90 days, I sit down, I write about these 12 areas, and then I identify one impact that I want to have over the next 90 days. And I visualize how I'm going to work on it. So if, for example, I want to spend more time with my parents, I'm going to visualize when is it that I'm going to meet them, what are we going to do, how do I make sure I'm on track? And then I focus on this one thing, one improvement, and that's been really good for me. Because I think you cannot avoid mistakes in life, but you can avoid regret to a large part by being more conscious and by checking in with yourself consciously every now and then.
Yeah. Any questions from the audience? Yes.
It's a question about. I'll project.
No, it's for the camera.
Okay. It's a question about the essentialism.
Speak up a little bit.
Okay.
Or stand up.
Cedric? It's a question about essentialism. Some of the things we own, we're emotionally attached to. When downsizing, how do you get past that barrier?
Mm-hmm.
So in downsizing from the things that we own, how do you get past the barrier of the things we're emotionally attached to?
So it's interesting, I never had much of an emotional connection to things, but of course there were certain certain things that had special meaning, like a t-shirt or photo albums or stuff like that. And I did two things. One is
So did that at your parents' place?
Yeah, I'm going to get to that, because first the check that I do every 90 days is like, have I used this in the last 90 days, or am I definitely going to need it in the next 90 days, and if not, it goes away. Now at the beginning, as long as I had this like emotional barrier, I put it somewhere in a corner with my parents or at the place that I still had at the time. Yeah. Of course, I never went back to that bag once. Like once it's out of sight, it was out of mind as well. Then I digitalized a lot of the things like pictures and that stuff, and realized that now I have it always with me, I have it always accessible. That helped. And I think the third realization that I had was giving stuff away was so fulfilling. And for a large part of our life, we're just trained to accumulate stuff, right? And we're trained by media and society that we should feel good about buying a new iPhone and having X amount of pants and clothing in our at home. But one thing that I realized once I started giving away my clothing was that I previously owned like 40 t-shirts. Now I own like 3 or 4. So I was able to give away almost 40 t-shirts. And once I realized that now probably almost 40 people have a t-shirt that either had 1 too less or didn't have any t-shirts, that was super fulfilling. And so for most of the things that I had emotional attachment to previously, that kind of overweight or outweighed that downside.
So, Cedric, I love the word essentialism. So I like the word minimalism even more, which is fine. But
yeah. That's going to be a long discussion.
So my question is more about, you talked before about believing in the team first when you invest in startups. And when you don't believe in the team, I guess you don't invest in them. And when you say essentialism sometimes, and then you describe your lifestyle, sometimes to me sounds more like extremism, which I'm sure you probably have heard people that you're just a very extreme guy. And I wonder if you are sitting across the table from a founder who reminds you of yourself, do you actually then believe in them? Or do you get scared of this type of personality who is very much like you? Or how do you handle people who are as extreme as you? I mean, fasting and not drinking water and reflecting every 90 days. I mean, these are all things that can be good, bad, but at the very least they're extreme, right? So.
Yeah, speaking of extreme, I think I can tell a story that hopefully I want to say I've also learned over the years. In one company, Centask, we do team retreats because the whole team is distributed. So every 90 days we bring everyone together for a week, And then we focus on two things: long-term planning and vision and making sure we're all going the same direction. And second is team building and spending time together and getting to know the person behind the Slack name. And while we often just go out for dinners or sit together, I also always try to make it a bit special. And one day I told the guys we're going to go picnic and invited everyone into a small bus, and we drove a bit outside Berlin, and then we went surprise skydiving.
Surprise one.
Yeah. And I've learned that not everyone likes surprises as much as I do. Because there was one person that just didn't want to jump and like fought with everything not to get out the plane, and it was definitely not a good experience for him. And I've learned, well, he was also the only person who it was not a surprise for, because he helped plan it. And for 2 weeks leading up to that day, he, like daily, he would send me newspaper articles of whenever some parachute didn't open somewhere in the world. I think he also, so if you ever take your team surprise skydiving, make sure it's a surprise for everyone, was my learning. But my much bigger learning was that, of course, I'm not looking for just similar people. I personally believe that complementary founding teams are the best mix. So you want to have very different personalities in the team, because they all should play out their strengths, right? If you only have people that want to do the sales, then they're going to be stepping on each other's toes, and no one's going to take care of product. Vice versa, if you have other roles that overlap too much. I think it's always fun for me to meet someone that shares part of the mindset, of course. But when I'm looking through the investor lens, then I'm looking for diversity in a founding team. Yeah.
Does that answer your question?
Do you think a founder team should be a person who has some skills or mindset like you?
Not necessarily. I don't think I'm looking to invest in someone that does the same, because I think my personality type lends itself to the investor role. Right? And so if I'm investing in a company, I'm investing in an entrepreneur, someone that's willing to go the full 9 yards and lead this company to success 5, 10, 15 years down the road. So not necessarily. I wouldn't say it's I think if I recognize similar traits in someone on the other side of the table, it's a pro on the personal level, because it's interesting to talk to them and share experiences. But if I'm looking at them as entrepreneurs in a founding team, I don't think it's a pro or a con necessarily.
Yes.
Hello. Yeah.
Stand
hi.
up, please.
Yeah. Hello. I have a question from the practical point of view, because what makes me really fascinated is the certain journey that you made actually in your life to get, first of all, to make a certain deal with a certain things which were programmed in yourself before, and then you start to exercise in the certain models that gave you a certain kind of freedom. Especially what I'm talking about is this kind of illusionary possession programs.
Uh-huh.
And when I got to know, okay, there are like 64 or several like things that you possess, and you're able to make the things actually that not only you want, but also you want. And yeah, this like this harmony. And how is it possible, you know, with this kind of limited things, which are listed like into 64 items? I was lucky to have a visit like 2 weeks ago of another friend of mine. He's an author of 33 books. And he comes to me, hey, Olaf, do you have any sleeping possibility by you? But he published like 33 books, and he possessed 99 items in his life. And then we go to the jam session, and he asked me, Olaf, when can I store this one small backpack that is safe? Because actually, I was there, and like part of my possession was stolen, but by helping the other people that have things stolen, I got all my things back. And this is another part of his book. So the question is more about this practical thing. How are we able, how are you, first of all, you as an example, how are you able to reduce your everyday life in this, like everybody's living, everybody needs certain things, but how to create a model to live in this kind of independency, to be yourself, to realize, to support the companies, to support the projects with owning just a few little things. That's a question. Thank you very much.
I think, so what always amazes me is how we think it's so hard to live with few things, right? Because we were all born with nothing. And lots of you have probably traveled at some point for a few months and realized that you didn't more than a backpack full of stuff. And I think I just applied that concept, and I'm keeping to it with my everyday life. Of course, I'm kind of lucky. I don't have any hobbies that require me to have tennis racks or a bunch of like climbing equipment that I need to carry around. But other than that, I don't think we all need that much. I think a lot of that is portrayed in the media because companies make money. If we believe that we need several pants and we need a bunch of different jackets for all different types of occasions. But I think in the end, two things. One, we don't need that much. And B, everything is already there anyway. So even if I wanted to go skiing, I'm pretty sure within less than half a day, I can find some of my friends that own a second ski suit and skiing equipment. So in a sense, it's like this sharing economy that already exists among all of us. It just hasn't emerged into a company yet.
Maybe the question he's trying to ask is, how do you get there? So did you, from one day to the next, throw all your shit out and like, this is it? Or was it a step?
What did the process look like?
Yeah, because for you,
it's about the process.
Okay.
Because if you go from tonight, you go home, everyone goes home and says, okay, what are the 60 things I'm going to keep? You're going to have a heart attack.
Yeah. So I think first, you make what you measure, right? It's something that we learn about KPIs and analytics. What that means for me is, when I first asked myself that question, how much stuff do I own? I was fascinated that I didn't even know if it was 100 things, 1,000 things, or 5,000 things. At that time, I had already moved my stuff between continents a few times. And so what I did, being trained as an engineer, I went home and I started a spreadsheet, collecting everything that I owned. What was the outcome of that? The learning from that were two things. One, it was about 600 plus items that I owned at the time. And second, it took me almost 3 months to complete that list. So I owned a lot of, even though I didn't own a whole bunch, still I had stuff at my parents' place, stuff that I had lent out to or let friends borrow. So I was amazed that it took me that long to even become conscious. Now, once I had that list, there were a few things that were interesting questions, right? If I can only own one type of t-shirt, which type of t-shirt would you own? And I kind of enjoy that thought process of like, what has the most value out of all variations that I've seen? What is the one that I'm going to end up with? Same for shoes. Like I can wear these leather shoes with a suit, and I can wear them with shorts, and I can wear them with this type of outfit, and they always look okay. So that already let me get rid of a bunch of stuff. And then I've used this process that I mentioned before, the 90-90, where every now and then I would look at my list and ask myself, and try to be very honest with myself, what have I not used and what am I not going to use in the next 90 days? And then that answered the question for what I should remove right now. And that let me go down to about 127 things while I still had an apartment way back. And then the day came when I just realized I don't need an apartment, and that suddenly helped me reduce stuff down to just a backpack of, well, it was actually about 71 things that I left with when I had the backpack, but 71 is just such an ugly number that I figured, how can I get closer to something that's nice? And I found a way to get rid of 7 additional items, and 64 is just this beautiful number. It's very visual, right? If you imagine a chessboard, it's like you can place on each field on the chessboard, you can put 1 item, and that's it. Like you can't go over. Yeah, so that's how it happened.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
It's very interesting because it's somehow like the first step for a certain model for the people in the future to be able to be themselves and at the same time possess like only what they need. Thank you.
Yeah.
I think Hans had a question.
There are more questions,
Yeah.
if you don't mind.
Thank you. Very nice your experience.
It's on.
It's okay.
It's on.
Don't touch. That's okay.
I have 2 questions. Very simple. How you break a no mentality, personality? It's in business. Sometimes you come across to people that is very close to new ideas, to change. That is number 1. And second, you mentioned you invest, just not to go so deep, how you do funding to companies? You go to private investors or you use your own money, and whatever the case is, both are different, let's say, expectations. You have also in your mind return of investment that you have in your mind. That is everything. Thank you, Hans Richard.
So I'll start with the second question. You can maybe add if I forget about something. But so luckily, the first company that I started, MediaSign, was an agency, and we didn't need much but a laptop to work and get started. I think that's the ideal scenario for your first company, right? You can bootstrap it, you can build it from the ground up. At some point, we took out that loan in order to start renting offices, but we already had it kind of proven that people wanted what we created. Later on, there's cases on the other end of the spectrum, like DFINITY, which has raised just over $200 million US dollars. And then you talk to a full range of investors. I think depending on which stage you're in, you either want to talk to VCs, business angels, or maybe strategic investors, depending on what your business does and where it's currently at. So I think there's no general answer for me. I think it's very broad, depending on what you're building and which stage you're in. Now, the first question about how do I deal with the no mentality, or someone that subscribes to the status quo and doesn't see the new way of doing things. So I think first, I'm not a missionary. I'm not trying to say anyone else should live with your things or just 64 things. Or I think what I want to say is like live consciously and think about what it is that makes you happy, and then build your life around that. And for me, that means I want to be liberated from a lot of stuff. But everyone else might come to completely different conclusions. Second, so I'm not trying to convince someone by default to adjust to a certain lifestyle. And second, I have what I call like my manifest of like a few principles that I try to live by. And one that's very high up there is think in solutions, not in problems. So everything that's not going right in the world right now and in my life and in my, it could be relationships or companies or all areas of life, whatever goes wrong, I always try to see it as a challenge and an opportunity to get better and improve, rather than something that puts me down and makes me sad. So in that sense, I don't think I do well with the no mentality, and I tend to just charge ahead and change things instead of focusing on the problem for too long.
I don't know how long you've lived this kind of lifestyle. Sure. So I don't know how long you've lived this lifestyle, but I was wondering, do you think being a man helped you to succeed and continue living like that?
From the minimalist perspective, or from the
Exactly,
business
yes.
perspective?
From the essentialism perspective.
So yeah, I guess with women you can't have 64 things. You have 64 things in your makeup kit. So how do you?
So I don't subscribe to that. I'm not sure what the number is. I think you can live with just the stuff that you really need instead of having too much, whether you're a man or a woman or whatever you identify as. I know that there's actually been, I think, I'd have to look it up, I think there's a dress by Woolworth that's made so you can wear it as a long, elegant dress, as like a short black dress, and like it's like one dress that you can wear for like 5 different occasions. So there's definitely some stuff that happens in the women fashion industry as well that would make it at least more feasible. But then again, I don't think it's about the number. I don't think it's about 64 versus 100 items, right? And that means you could add 32 dresses or makeup items and so on. You could also choose a different metric to look at it. You could look at volume, like whatever fits into a backpack, and maybe it would just mean you need to buy smaller cosmetic products if you need a lot of those. I'm just following that example now, right? Or you could focus on weight, because that's what you mostly want to optimize for. 64, the number of things for me was just what I went by. And of course it correlates with weight and volume and everything.
It's more about the mindset.
I think it's more about the mindset, yeah. And honestly, I don't see a reason why anyone else wouldn't be able to live the way I do, except for, of course, if you need equipment to do your job or to be happy in your free time. That for some reason is bigger. But I don't think there's to me, there's an obvious disadvantage if you're of a different gender. But maybe you see one. I mean, I'd be happy to be challenged.
I was just wondering, being a woman, you need different shoes, different outfits, different bags for different occasions.
Well, if I may challenge you, why don't you try to just pick a certain number of outfits for the next 30 days or 90 days, and then just run the experiment. I mean, the worst that can happen is you have to go back to your wardrobe and pick something else out of there, right? But one experience that Elena and I made when we went on our first trip.
Elena's your wife.
My wife, yeah. We, of course, I didn't say you can only own a certain amount of things, but one thing that I did say is I don't travel with someone that checks luggage. Because life is just too short to wait for a checked bag. And I think at first it created a bit of a challenge and tension for her. And we went to Africa, a trip that we had booked on our third date, and we did a safari and we went hiking, but we also went to some nice restaurants. So there was a number of like different occasions that came together within a 2-week trip. And what she realized was that once she got over that hurdle of I can't do it, and she focused on what is it, if I can only bring this one bag, what is it that I'm going to pack? She did that, and she never needed anything else on that whole trip. She actually brought a few, I think, dresses that she never wore on that trip, even though she had to pack in a small bag. So all I'd say is like have fun with it, go out and experiment, and then if it doesn't work the way you initially thought about it, adjust. But I don't think there's a physical principle that says women cannot live off of just X amount of things.
Can I add something? Like a personal experience, it wasn't a choice, it would just end up being like that. But I have lived 1 year with just one backpack. It was totally fine. And I'm obviously a girl. So yeah, it's possible.
I think we had some
I don't know who was first now. Wow, okay.
Thank you. When you first talked about why you are essentialist, the thing that came up in my mind was also sustainability, like you want to keep stuff out of your mind, maybe not accumulating rubbish, and I was wondering if these two things have something in common for you, and it's even something that's more and more important in business, like how do you think about these two things, sustainability and essentialism?
Yes, so to speak the truth, I was not motivated by sustainability when I decided to downsize. That was not my main motivation. I saw some overlap, but then also the lifestyle that I've been living for a few years when I was traveling so much is not exactly sustainable, because I could have probably owned hundreds of t-shirts and it wouldn't have been as bad for our environment as the flying that I've done that year, right? And that leads to an interesting question, and why someone that lives a conscious life, how can you fly so often even though you know how that impacts our environment? I think it was a necessity at the time, because as much as I do video calls and I'm in touch with everyone over the world constantly, I think in order to be creative and solve difficult problems, you have to be in the same room. In order to understand the person sitting across from you, you have to be in the same room. I think video calls are great to exchange information. They're not great to create together. And that's why I traveled so much, and unfortunately it just happened so that a lot of the projects needed attention at that time, and that led to the high frequency of going between places.
You were about every 3 days in a new location?
For about 3 years, I was on about 120 flights per year, which leads to the 3-day average per location per year over the course of the year. Yeah, and many, many tons of CO2 that I polluted the environment with. I think for me it made sense because it was necessary at that time to invest that time and face time into companies. Now that I'm more in charge of where I spend my time, I travel much, much less. Because it's not just the environment, it's also my body, like constantly being jet lagged, constantly being exposed to environments with hundreds of other people in a very small aluminum can. It's not the most fun environment you can choose.
But how you recharge your energy?
How do I recharge my energy? So in general, I really thrive on what I'm doing. I feel very fortunate that I am in the position that I am and that I get to spend time with incredible people, working on incredible projects and solving really hard problems. So that alone gives me a lot of energy. And then luckily, I'm able to sleep almost everywhere, almost any time, and relax in a hotel room as well as I do at home.
So daily, what do you do like every day? It's like you get up at 4, 5?
Sorry?
You get up at 4 in the morning?
I typically not that early, typically between 5 and 6. And then usually the first few hours of the day are completely mine, till about 8. And then usually, meaning I do exercising, I prepare for the day, I get in the right mindset. And then up until about 1 p.m. I try to work and block my calendar. No one else can take time from me during that time. I work on long-term projects, the stuff that's important, not urgent. And then in the afternoon I do reactive work. I respond to calls, I get into meetings, I have discussions and so on. At least that's the ideal scenario. Sometimes it gets mixed up if I'm on the other side of the world.
But you still sleep 7 hours or 8?
If you looked at my Fitbit right now, then definitely not, but 7 hours is like my goal, yeah. Yeah.
Hi, Cedric. I have actually 3 questions, but they are very simple. So the first one, what's your most fancy tool in your backpack?
What do you mean by fancy?
Multi-purpose.
Oh, multi-purpose?
Yeah.
Well, so I would say multi-purpose, definitely my phone, right? Because it lets me connect with people, it lets me write stuff, keep notes, and so on.
Except of your phone, like non-digital, old school. I forgot to say that.
Do you have a Swiss Army knife?
I don't have a Swiss. Well, I actually used to have a small multi-tool that I bought on a plane, only to have it taken away from me at TSA before the next flight. So I don't have that anymore. Maybe fancy or like extraordinary or thing that you wouldn't expect is I have 2 Swiss passports. Can you guess why?
You lost one? Some visa there.
No, sorry?
Some visa in the old one.
Some?
The visa.
Oh, no. But and?
You are a secret agent.
Or
now we gotta delete this whole thing and I need to blitz you.
maybe the other one is running like under Tim Ferriss of Switzerland?
No.
No?
No, it's very simple. Like because I spend a lot of time abroad, and then if I ever need to get a visa, I can send one passport in to get the visa while I'm traveling with the other one. Yeah, so maybe that's the
that will do.
fancy
Yeah,
item.
thank you.
It is legal, yeah. Yeah.
So the second question is, let's please share one more principle from your manifesto you've written.
It's always when you're put on the spot, it's like I'm blanking. Well, another one definitely is experiences before things, right? And one way how I express that in the manifest is presence is the best present. What I mean by that is it's very ingrained in our culture that we like to gift each other things. Birthdays, Christmas, and lots of other holidays and occasions. And so I talked about the process of how I went down from 600 to 64 things. But then it's a whole different process of how do you stay at 64 things, because people just like to give you stuff, especially my mom.
The clutter stream.
Huh?
The clutter stream.
Yeah, and so one sentence that really resonated with me early on is presence is the best present, meaning chances that you're going to be able to pick the one thing that I don't have but really need among my 64 things are less than 1% probably, even if you know me really well. So let's focus on something that no one can take from us, something that we both gain from, and let's just spend time together. And it can be as simple as let's go hike together or cook together or just spend time with each other without our phones. And I started doing that long before I downsized to just 64 things, and it's led to some really incredible experiences that I wouldn't want to miss. So that's another thing that I can only challenge you to try and see. Let's say for next Christmas, challenge your friends and family to gift you time instead of things and see how it affects your happiness.
Thank you, beautiful answer. And the last one? Sorry, this is very short, just yes and no and maybe some extra sentence. Do you meditate?
No. But so I think I get the same effect that others get from meditation by a lot of my workout routines. So because I travel so much, I don't rely on a gym or on a soccer club or whatever to get my workouts in. I do a lot of bodyweight exercises, push-ups, sit-ups, and they are in their nature very repetitive. And I think that's where I get a lot of the same effects from. And then at the same time, it takes a lot to make me uneasy to the point where I cannot sleep and I cannot be calm. Over the last 17 years, I've been in a lot of stressful situations, and I feel I'm very at ease with myself for the most part. So it doesn't take me like an hour of yoga or meditation to find back to myself and calm myself and fall asleep well.
You mentioned experiences. What has been the most transformative experience in your life?
Getting married?
No, I don't think it deepened our relationship, but I don't think it has changed our lives in in an orthogonal way. One experience that comes to mind and isn't too long ago is I was in a car crash May of last year, so about 1.5 years ago. And it was a very, very close call. I could be sitting here without a hat today if only a few circumstances were different. And it definitely reinforced that conscious living and reinforcing my belief in making sure that I don't just put items on my bucket list, but I also tick things off and I make sure I live life to the fullest. I don't get caught up in just what's urgent and what seems interesting right now, but I do take the time to think about what is it that I want to do with my life. And if it's something that I'm not doing right now, why am I not doing it and how can I start doing that with my life? So that's definitely been an important event in the last couple of years. Overall, I think in my year, it probably was founding my first company. Like that was just so much fun, but also so much hard work. And I think I consider myself very fortunate that I found my true passion very early in life.
Thank you.
So I think we have one or two last questions.
Yes.
Yes, I waited a long time. Hi, Cedric.
Good to see you.
Good to see you too. Two questions, I'm sorry for anyone who's waiting. Two questions. One is essentialism in a physical world. We got that story. How about the digital world? Do you also have only 64 photos in your cloud, 64 files, stuff like that? Do you have inbox zero? Like, do you transfer that mindset in your digital world as well? Because, like you said, you digitized a lot of things got digitized, like photo albums, stuff like that. So that's sort of that could be called cheating as well. And the second question outside that topic. What's the most successful startup you invested in, and why do you think it's got the most, why it's the most successful?
Okay. Yeah. So first question is about how do I think about the digital pieces or items. And there's a number of ways how I look at it. Number one is that same question, does something drain energy from me or is it giving me energy? Now, you mentioned pictures or photos. I keep a lot of my assets in one and the same place, which makes it very easy for me to access any given photo of the last 31 years within like a few fingertips. So that gives value to me, and I don't care whether it's 64 pictures or 64,000 pictures. So there I don't see a reason for me to reduce. On the other hand, screen estate on my phone, like the number of apps and thereby the number of distractions that I have on my phone, I'm very conscious about which apps I allow to notify me. So I have notifications turned off for all messengers and for most other apps as well. And I delete that. That's actually one of my favorite things to do on a plane, is like to go through my phone and ask myself the same question: which app have I not used in the last 2 weeks? And am I not going to use in the next 2 weeks? And if the answer is yes to both questions, the app has to go, and I delete it. So that helps me reduce the amount of digital clutter to some degree. Your second question was about what do I consider the most successful startup that I invested in, and what makes them so successful. Luckily, there's a few that are doing really well. One example that I could point out is Frontify, just because I just visited their New York office a few days ago. They're a startup out of St. Gallen, Switzerland.
He was a guest at Startup Grind as well.
Oh, perfect. So in very short, they do B2B software for businesses that want to more consistently manage their brand. And I think for them, again, it's not the product or the market that made them successful, it's the founding team and the culture that they were able to build. To me, it was quite amazing actually to see that the culture that they've built in St. Gallen has transferred so easily to their office in New York. Right. When I was there, I felt like I was at Frontify, at a Frontify workplace. And I think it speaks volumes for the founders of that company, Roger and Andy, that they've accomplished that.
Right.
Hope that answers the...
Roger.
Hey.
Actually, first of all, thank you very much for your vlog. I love it. Please keep up the good work. I really love your YouTube videos. And my question is pretty simple and yet complex. What do you think? Where's the future of blockchain? What do you think? Where are we heading? You once mentioned like you want to be on a blockchain with a passport and all those kind of things, but there's a lot of opinions about it. What's your opinion? Where are we going?
Great question. And we had, I think, an hour-long chat about that with some other guests here right before we came up here. Yeah. So I think there's two kinds of blockchain companies. One is infrastructure, and one which DFINITY belongs to that category, and the other one is applications. And just before this, we were talking about CryptoKitties, which, for those who don't know, is a platform where you can generate your kitties, your cats, on the blockchain, and you can have them mate with some other kitties of your friends, and they will produce new kitties. Fun fact, they lay eggs on that platform. And believe it or not, that's the most, besides money transfer or token transfers, that's the most used blockchain application to date. which I think says a lot about where the space is at, right? So you mentioned ideas that I have for the long term, or why I believe in a company like DFINITY and why I think it's important providing infrastructure that allows us to run scalable blockchain applications. I think the blockchain brings us very interesting qualities. A trustless environment, meaning we don't have to trust one single party in an environment. Transparency, meaning we can now for the first time verify that whatever someone promises an application will do, we can actually verify that it does that. Unstoppability and a few more. And just to pick one of those qualities, transparency, I think would be hugely helpful if we think about e-voting. Right? Because the reason why e-voting has not been simplified or rolled out in a wider context, I think to a large degree is that if we introduce a single point of failure, we put our whole society at risk. It's so important, it's such an important process. Luckily here in Switzerland, we can more or less trust the system. If we send in the letter and we select yes, then I firmly believe that that will actually be counted as a yes and it will end up in the final poll. Now, we cannot create a transparent system with traditional hardware, or it's extremely hard on the traditional stack. I think blockchain gives us the opportunity to do that. And then why is it important? Not just because now it takes us less time to vote once a quarter, but I think the world is becoming more and more extreme because we only always have the option between two options. It's always a binary decision, right? Either keep the current system or go to something else that's probably at the other end of the spectrum, just because we need to go more and more extreme in order to capture people's interest. Now, if we had a system that allowed us to vote more often on a daily basis, participate in our political system, what we could introduce instead is liquid democracy, but also much more frequent voting. So instead of just having one vote and it's final, we could first all submit proposals. And then we do a first vote, and from 100 proposals, or however many were submitted, we cut down to the top 5, either by a certain percentage, or just take the top 5, or anything that gets over 10% of all votes. And only then we vote on the final proposal. So now we vote again on one of those 5, and I think it would lead to a much more balanced outcome in most of our polls. So that's just one application. There's lots more in education and digital identity, where I think it will enable, it will equalize opportunities across the world, right? For example, in education, if I was able to prove that I did a certain online course, they could now become more valuable. One of the reasons why we still rely on university certificates is because there's a state institution that proves to me that that student has actually done those courses. Now, if there was a way for me to have the same trust into online courses, suddenly people that live very far away from ETH could participate in courses and prove that they've gone through that process. And now people that live in areas far, far away from here that don't have those educational systems could participate in the same global employment market. So lots of ideas, to be very short, but I think it's important that we build a system that offers us trustless, transparent, unstoppable systems.
We could probably go on for a significant amount of time, but it's about time to wrap up. And we like to wrap up with a series of short questions that we ask everyone, every guest that we have. There's no right or wrong answer. It's just the first thing that comes to mind.
Short answers as well.
Ideally.
Okay. I'll try.
So what is one item that you own that you would never sell?
My pants.
What is your most unusual skill?
I can fall asleep anywhere, anytime.
Over here?
Yeah.
What's more important, strength, speed, or stamina?
Stamina.
Which historical figure do you admire?
Richard Feynman, who was a physicist at the Manhattan Project, and I admire him for his, he had a very interesting life, lots of ups and downs, very extremely smart and intelligent person, and I just admire his, the joyous way and happy way he dealt with everything that was thrown his way.
Nice. What's your favorite season of the year?
Autumn.
When was the last time that you tried something new?
I just flew a jet trainer plane above Manhattan 10 days ago, which is definitely new.
Team or single founder?
Team.
Cats or dogs?
Neither.
Beer or wine?
Again, neither. I just drink still water.
Your favorite app on your phone?
The phone app, probably.
Telephone calls?
Yeah.
What's something that's still on your bucket list?
So one thing that Elena and I have on our bucket list is at one point we both want to take a few months off from our work life and rent a plane and do a plane trip across the US for like 6 months and just go visit all these like small cities and all the different states and yeah, kind of do a road trip by plane.
Okay, cool. And if you could have the attribute of an animal, any animal, what would you choose?
Chameleon, probably.
Very good.
The stealth. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Cedric, for joining us this evening and for all that you shared with us. Really appreciate it. You're still around a little bit this evening.
Yeah, I'll be here.
If anyone has any questions during the apero. But really appreciate you taking the time to share your perspectives with us.
Of course. Thanks for having me.